Hi, I'm Annika Vogt, co-curator of the current group exhibition, A Winter's Tale, on display within the windows of the Athens Cultural Center. A Winter's Tale harkens back to days old, when a well-told tale had the power to ignite imagination and wonder. This exhibition features Hudson Valley, New York-based artists Iria Bodien, Jenny Getty, Ellen Menzies, Danielle Norris, and Christine Feaster, whose works explore storytelling through the lens of both fairy tale and newly constructed narratives. A Winter's Tale is on display December 5th, 2020 through January 17th, 2021. And the Athens Cultural Center is located at 24 2nd Street in Athens, New York. Now, without further ado, the Athens Cultural Center and Dr. Evarts Library is pleased to present this video series examining Hudson Valley lore with A Winter's Tale co-curator Amanda Lees and Greene County historian Jonathan Palmer. We hope you enjoy and thank you for watching.
Hi, I'm Amanda Lees. I'm the co-curator of A Winter's Tale, the Athens Cultural Center, and I'm here with Jonathan Palmer, again, the Greene County historian. And today we're also joined by Heather Bruegl, the Director of Cultural Affairs of the Stockbridge-Munsee Community. Heather, thank you so much for being here. And I just want to say quickly, as we were doing research for this video series and gathering local legends to talk about, we wanted to look for some from the Mohican and Lenape that were about the area that Athens now occupies, the Hudson River and the Catskill Mountains. But it was very difficult to find Mohican and Lenape legends that specifically pertain to this area, and even more difficult to find any that were recorded by a Mohican or Lenape person rather than a European colonizer. And I felt that I couldn't trust any of the source material we found. We of course come across these shameful gaps in our already shameful history all too often. And if you weren't a white man, your perspective was not deemed important enough to record. In the space of the absence of the perspectives on the history of this region, we can talk about why that absence exists. So Heather, we want to ask you today to share with us more about the Stockbridge-Munsee community, the people who lived here prior to colonization, and why their stories are sorely missing from our common knowledge of the region.
Yes, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm super excited to be part of this programming and to talk a little Indigenous and Stockbridge-Munsee history. I first want to acknowledge that I am coming to you from our reservation land in Northeast Wisconsin that was created by the Treaty of 1856. So I want to just make that acknowledgement, and our homelands are out east. So even though we're in Wisconsin, our homelands are out east, and they take up much of the MohHeConNuck River Valley, which is the Hudson River Valley. So in New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Vermont, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. We do also have some sites of cultural significance in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas as well. So we do have a story that spreads in a vast array of people, but mainly out east, and we work to protect our history that's out there and protect our culturally significant sites that are out there as well. And so we have a story that spreads from the MohHeConNuck River Valley all the way to Wisconsin, and it's a rich history, and I'm excited to be able to just share some of it with you today.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, this is fantastic. I guess, I'm dropping in my 2 cents now just to kind of get the ball rolling with the conversation. For everybody who had tuned into the previous 2 videos that have been posted by the Cultural Center in relation to as part of a Winter's Tale, I did a lot of stewing after giving the retelling of the legends of Sally Hamilton and the story of Anna Swartz. Tales of 2 white women who meet these untimely fates in this place. And I got thinking, especially after kind of rewatching the retelling I gave of Anna Swartz's story, some of the problematic nature of the way that I was telling the tale. Choice among them, when I got to discussing William Salisbury, who was a grandson of Sylvester Salisbury, who was a general involved with the takeover of New Netherland from the Dutch in the 1670s. This man, William Salisbury, I describe him as being a member of one of the original families of this place, which, it's easy for me when I go back to our archives at the Historical Society and I look at 350 years of European history of this place, it's easy for me to look at those shelves and say, yeah, he's one of the earliest names here, must be one of the first families. And it glances over entirely the fact that we're really trying to grapple with, what would be 13,000 years of rich narratives and human tradition in this place. And, I grasp at straws to try to tell 350 of them and tell them poorly from a very biased angle. So, this is one of the things that, to kind of get the ball rolling, it's like, okay, how is this problematic that, I'm picking language like, first family of this place? And I know Heather's probably excited to jump in now.
Right. Yeah. So it's something to stop and think about. And this is something that I have discussed before on other platforms, is the importance of words and how they matter. So, you've got like those big words like decolonize and things like that. And, that's great. It's great to decolonize the narratives that you're telling. But then what do you do after you decolonize them? You have to indigenize them. You've got to put in that indigenous histories. And it's really no fault of your own, John, that you described that family as one of the first families that was there, because that's the narrative that was written. It's very easy to overlook the story of the original inhabitants of North America, of the continent itself, when it's a story that's not told in everyday history. And it starts with, just a very simple explanation, when you're in schools. I understand teachers have so much to cover, and this year I know has been absolutely crazy. So shout out to teachers. And I know you only have so much time to cover so much history. And so it gets brushed over. So when you think about the beginnings of something, you don't go back those 13,000 years or, those 10,000 years or whatever. You go back to when, 1609, when Henry Hudson came down the Hudson River. You go back to 1620 when the Pilgrims landed, at Plymouth Rock. You think about those things. And when you think about the inception of towns, cities like Athens, you think about the first families, Eurocentric families that were settled there. You tend to forget about the Stockbridge-Munsee, the Mohican people who were there, the Munsee Lenape people who were there, the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Tuscarora, the Seneca. You forget about all those people who have those rich histories that were there beforehand.
Yeah. So, and this is spot on, it's kind of appropriate. I'm sitting in front of, some maps right now of the county, which is a very, very European geopolitical conceptualization of land. In Athens in particular, probably some of the only traces we have left of the native people of that place don't date any later than the 1680s in the retelling of the patents, which led to the creation, of the European settlement of that place. There's a place name that was recurring right up until I was a little kid. It was Macowamek, which was given as a southern boundary of the Lunenburg patent in Athens. It was a large rock, which, in the romanticized retelling of, the settlement of this place by Europeans, was supposedly a great meeting place of native people prior to European arrival here. And I always hear those things and I listen to those stories and I say, okay, that's a nice romanticized telling that certainly vests our area with a romantic tradition. But, the telling again, whose truth is that, or who has agency and who benefits from the retelling of that? Because, when you talk about Macoamic, or, we call it Black Rock alternately. The retelling of that never benefits a Native person. It always benefits the people who live in the place currently. It gives them some sort of historic association going back before they can recall.
Right, absolutely. And why is that? That's because history is written by the victors. So it's written by the people who survived, or who not survived, survive was the wrong word, the people who dominated that area. So you're not going to hear about, the enslaved people or the indigenous people, the other people of color who were in that area, because their stories, the Eurocentric story is the dominant one that's there, and it happens throughout history, no matter where. And I think in the retelling of history, it's important to throw those indigenous voices in there. There's so much of our history that we overlook and that we miss when we exclude voices. It's history. There's this saying in the museum world: museums are not neutral. Because we're not neutral. Our job is to tell a story, good or bad. That's our job. Well, I think as historians, that's the same thing. History is not neutral. We're telling, the story of any event throughout history, good or bad. It's facts. And sometimes those facts are not pleasant. And I think sometimes people tend to forget that. And there's a huge process of unlearning that has to happen in order for people to understand the history. And I think, if anything, people should be upset that they're missing out on a huge chunk of really cool history.
Yeah.
Because, I have a t-shirt that says, Native history didn't start in 1492.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It started way before that. And it's kind of cool if you think about it. And myself, if I wasn't a historian, I think I would be really, really ticked off if I found out I was, having a huge chunk of history excluded from the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with that thought, talking about how, the Native voices, Native narratives are excluded from this very Eurocentric retelling of the history of this place, there's a number of reasons why those narratives are overlooked. They're never recorded. They're never made available. How do you reconcile with that gap? Where are these stories kept? How are they kept? How do you encounter them? Because this whole program is about encountering these stories.
Yeah, so a lot of time in Indigenous culture, there's the tradition of oral, the stories being passed down orally, and that happens. And in some cases, oral tradition has been written down, and in other cases, it's just been completely lost.
Mm-hmm.
And but those who have been able to retain that sense of oral tradition and writing the stories down, that's where you can find so much information. And I know, like, here in our community, while there are some stories from the past that have been lost to history, there are others more recently that, even just from the move from Stockbridge, Massachusetts to Indiana to Wisconsin, where we have those stories. The issue comes into play, and again, this is where I think history written by the victors plays into a role here, is we were colonized so early on because we were on the east side of the United States, or what was going to become the United States. So we lost a lot of things right away. And that's really hard and that's really tough. And so we can only imagine, what our ancestors did to survive that. And some of that is letting go of those stories and letting go of those traditions. And that can be difficult to reconcile with, particularly when you feel like something's tugging at you and it's missing. It's, how do you tell that story? And sometimes, stories can come to you in dreams. They can come to you, just through reading different documents and different historical documents that we have here. You can kind of put things together. But a lot of times, we did have really good storytellers, historians, as I would say, in our community. John Quincy, Hendrik Opperman, who were great leaders during the 17 and 1800s, who wrote things down. And that was really important. So that tells, it might not tell the mythology, the folklore that people like to look at, but it tells the history of who we are. And I think, I like to thank James Fenimore Cooper all the time for me having to defend we are not the last of the Mohicans, but because so much was lost due to colonization early on. 1609 is when we met Henry Hudson. That's very, very early. And so I think when you lose that so early on, you do end up with those stories of the last of the Mohicans, where it's romanticized and it's mythology and it's folklore, because we don't have a lot of those stories to say, hold on, wait, this is not what went on. We have our historical records, but facts can only get you so far. I think sometimes people like the mythology of it all.
Yeah. It's interesting as you're talking about this, because, one of the things that I touched on in the last segment that we did about Anna Swartz was how this woman became kind of an unwitting agent, in the retelling of her tale, to touch on the narratives of immigrants, to touch on the narratives of enslaved people, to touch on the narratives of class disparity. When she herself never, necessarily was cognizant of those issues that she, post-mortem got swept up into. But also, more importantly, you're talking about how so much of what the Stockbridge-Munsee has to grapple with when you're looking at, going back in time and uncovering the narratives of your people in place, that acceptance of kind of letting go of things that can't be recovered. You have that sense of loss, which ultimately pervades. And, we've got here, and I say here is in the Historical Society, and me as the county historian, looking at our past as a European tradition, loss is like a big no-no. It's like, you can't accept that something has been lost. And if something was lost, then we're going to go back and fill it in these different ways. And, that's so much of the folk stories that I've been talking about, is the ways that we've gone back. And when there was a gap, we patched it with something. We created people to fill in those things, or we retold the story in a different way to fill it in. And it contributes to a cohesiveness rather than demonstrating a fundamental loss, which is just an entirely different way of thinking about it, I suppose.
Yeah, I think in some instances we have done that too. Taking the histories that were written by John Quinney or Hendrik Opperman or other Austin Quinney, other leaders in our tribe, we've taken those histories that they've written down and we've been able to, recover some of what we might have lost, which has been really good, particularly when it comes to language. And so that's been really helpful in order to recover some of that was lost. I don't know if do you want me to speak a little bit about our language and the loss of that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So we are, we're unique because we have our tribe recognizes two official languages. So we have our Munsee Lenape language, and then we also have our Mohican language. And during the 1960s and 1950s, 60s, and 70s, there was a revitalization of the Munsee language. And I don't want to say that was easy to do, but it was easier to do because there were still fluent speakers of Munsee, and there still are today. And so a lot of our community members went to Canada in order to learn that, because, through removal, tribes moved in different areas, and some of the Lenape people went to Canada. And so they were able to go there to recover some of that language, learn it, bring it back here to the community in Wisconsin. And I wouldn't say we actually have fluent speakers, but I would say we have conversational speakers. You can kind of carry on a conversation a little bit in Munsee. But what was more interesting, not that that wasn't interesting, but what's even more interesting is the revitalization of our Mohican language, which again was lost pretty early on due to colonization. And through the writings of people like Hendrik Opperman and John Quinney and Austin Quinney and other historians and writers of our time, we were able to use those documents that they wrote in, and we were able to bring that language back to life within the last couple of years. And it was harder to do because there wasn't anybody alive who could speak Mohican. The last speaker of Mohican that we knew of died in the 1930s. Wow. So we were going just off documentation and just off of what was written and just off of what people could remember, like elders, asking our elders, when you were a child, do you remember, certain words or phrases that you might have heard your parents say, and so on and so forth. So it was really going off of that oral tradition in the storytelling and things like that, where we were able to bring that language. We like to say it wasn't dead, it was sleeping. Mm-hmm. And we were able to kind of bring it back to life. And we are, well on our way to having some fluent speakers again. And it was because of the writing down of stories, the writing down of our histories, the writing, oh my gosh, I can't. Translating, sorry, I was like, what is the word? Translating of English catechisms into Mohican, that we were able, it was through all of that we were able to kind of like bring that language back to life, which is really kind of cool. And I'm very excited to be part of that.
Yeah.
That's remarkable. As English catechisms, of course, of all the things to go to, it's like one of the perfect manifestations of, a colonialist approach to,
Absolutely.
It's not as bad as it gets, but lo and behold, there in that strange, obscure source is a key to uncovering
a story.
Yeah. And recovering a language, which is, and again, like that, even that a fundamental loss. It's like, to imagine that one day, that there would be people grappling with, figuring out how to speak English just to recover that tradition. It's just, it doesn't even cross your mind. As a historian, for me being here right now, it's not something I'd grapple with, but it's it's a fundamental crux of, unlocking the Stockbridge-Munsee's past, is to recover the language as part of that.
Absolutely. And I would say up until I was in this position, that would have never crossed my mind either. So I'm like right there with you of thinking about, the importance of, obviously as an Indigenous historian, I know the importance of language.
Yeah.
But as a historian of early colonial history, I would have never thought of that. When talking about the founding of the United States, or, George Washington crossing the Delaware or anything, I would have never in a million years put the two together until now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's, so that, not to move the conversation along from that point.
Yeah, no.
But, I'm thinking, again, you're mentioning these historians, these people who recorded these oral traditions. You listed, like, what was it? I think it was 4 authors off the top of your head whose 19th century source material is important to recover the history of the Stockbridge-Munsee. These are writers, these are historians who I'm just not familiar with their narratives, even though their narratives relate fundamentally to the history of the place that I purport to know the past of. So for me to go out and find those resources, what's the process? Are these things that are published and widely distributed and available in places?
Yeah, so you can, so sitting here in our building in Wisconsin, I am sitting on the largest archives of Mohican history in the world. That is what I'm sitting on. So of course, as somebody who studied history, I'm just like, it's like amazing. It was like when I went to Philadelphia last year and I was like, the Museum of the American Revolution, and then like 20 other museums. I was like, oh my God, I'm so excited.
Yeah.
Anywho. But I'm such a nerd. But so we have writings and documentation here from, tribal leaders in the 1800s, and even through now that talk about the history of the Stockbridge-Munsee. But you can also find them online. So right now, my collection, while I have it and it's digitized, it's not on a platform yet that I can put out to the public. That's what we're working on right now. Yeah, but you need something, I can probably find it for you and send it to you. However, there are other universities in the area, in the New England area, that have either copies or the originals of some of the documentation that we also have here. So I believe Dartmouth has a collection of papers. Harvard is working on a collection of papers, digitizing them for the public. Once we have a platform to put our archives on, they will be available to the public as well. And what's interesting, what I think sets us apart from places like Dartmouth, places like Harvard, University of Massachusetts Amherst, and all those others, is it's us telling the history of our people, which is so important. And that's, you know, tribal archives are, I'm quoting a dear friend of mine, a colleague, Dr. Rose Myron, tribal archives are a form of activism in tribal communities for us to tell our own history. And I think that is so important.
Absolutely. The ownership is so important. You answered my question, was going to be, you know, what's a good way to find actual reliable resources that come from Stockbridge-Munsee tellers and historians. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And in addition to that, you can visit our website. We've got other resources listed on there. I read a lot anyway, but as a historian, and I'm sure, John, you know, you read even more, and you kind of vet things as you're doing it. You're like, oh, this is good, or this is not good. Don't read this. Like, don't watch The Patriot and think you're going to have an accurate telling of the American Revolution. It's fun, and I'll admit I like it, but yeah, don't. And it's just like, don't watch Dances with Wolves and think you're going to get an accurate depiction of Plains life. You're not going to.
Yeah.
But so, you know, we're vetting things in our head as we're reading, as we're watching, and even like on our social media, on our Facebook, we'll put out things that we've read and be like, this is a good source. You need to read this. So we're constantly looking for reputable information as well that we can stand behind and endorse in the telling of our history.
Yeah.
You know, that's, you went above and beyond with my initial question, and I'm floored. First off, I am so excited for you guys to find a platform. I don't know, is there like a fundraising campaign or anything that's going on to help you guys get the platform going?
We are constantly fundraising for not just that, but also our ultimate goal here. The whole reason my position was created and I was hired is not just to tell the history of the Stockbridge-Munsee community, but also to do it within a brand new cultural center. And so we are working on raising funds for that as well. So if you go to our website, if you go to MohHeCon.com, click on departments, click on cultural affairs, you will find every donation link possible that you can. And it goes right to our programs, right to our departments immediately. So that's really good. But yeah, we're fundraising. Obviously, this has been a tough year for the general population, but also Indian country as well. And so we're trying to, I'm trying to do my part by helping our tribal nation by bringing in as much outside funding as possible. So tribal funds can go to keeping our elders taken care of, keeping supplies needed intact, keeping people employed. Also, which is super important.
It's so huge.
Well, you know, it's fascinating because, like, you know, you talk about this tribal archive, which is, you know, I mean, even I'm just excited thinking about the prospect of it, because I know before we started the video, I had talked about, you know, where it is that we see Native voices in the histories that are readily available to people here in Greene County. You know, like you pick up Beer's History of Greene County from 1884, and it is filled with all that Victoriana, where, you know, it's these kind of Native people, salted and peppered in was the word I used. That, you know, they're kind of present just to add flavor to a story. They don't have agency in and of themselves. And the creation of this tribal archive the preservation of these stories and, you know, the efforts that you guys are going through to make these things widely available to people on the web. I mean, it's groundbreaking because, you know, whereas when I digitize something, I'm making a, you know, a new facsimile of it that, you know, people have encountered a lot of these sources before, but it's never been that easy. So much of what you're all working on is stuff that, you know, I was entirely unaware of previously, which is of the utmost importance and is going to be seen for the first time by so many people. You know, and again, it's flipping a narrative on its head, you know, whereas we have like that, you know, the motif of this, you know, the Indians showing up and kind of camping out on William Salisbury's land in you know, 1840 and saying, yes, my family once owned all of this place. And that's the extent of their voice in our historical accounts.
Right.
So here we are.
And I just want to stop you right there, because what I said earlier about how words matter, in that story, you quoted us saying, we owned this land.
Yeah.
Own is not a word in our vocabulary.
Yeah.
We don't own the land. You can't own the land. So that is a colonist twist on that story. So that's like really interesting.
Yeah, and I mentioned before the patent for Lunenburg in Athens, you know, is originally transacted allegedly as a deed between, you know, I think it was 3 tribal representatives and Europeans who had taken up residence on their ancestral grounds, you know, and this deed, which is always cognized as the authoritative document. Well, we bought this. This was a nice transaction. This was amicable. And it's like, no, this is a cultural gulf right here that we're trying to gloss over the fact that there's a fundamental failure to understand these 2 different dynamics that were at work here when these things were struck.
Exactly. And if you don't understand the concept or the language, is that transaction really consensual?
No.
Exactly. Exactly.
No, absolutely not. But yeah, what you say, it's so good to be reminded to pay attention to language that way. I know I also used ownership earlier, like, you know, as just a productive way to unlearn, as you said earlier. Paying attention to those details in language is so important.
Absolutely. And it's just, it's not something that I think we're all cognitively aware of it. I do it too. As an Indigenous person, I do it. So it's not like anyone's 100% effective or, you know, consistent on this. So I think it's just, you know, because even for myself, being cognitively aware of the language that I use too, because I feel like I straddle 2 different worlds. I feel like there is the Indigenous history that I study, you know, and I talk about and I lecture on. And then there's the history of the United States that I also talk about and you know, lecture on as well. So I feel like I straddle both sides of the fence. So I sometimes, you know, can be giving a lecture on Indigenous history, and you've got some colonial history flowing in there as well, where I'm like, hold on, what am I talking about here? So it's just remembering to, you know, use those words in the correct context as well. So we all do it.
Oh, yeah.
That's fascinating, because I have the luxury of really only having to worry about, you know, in my day-to-day, I'm not an advocate of the history of the Stockbridge-Munsee, and that's a problem, which, you know,
We will make you one.
Yeah. Like when I'm telling these stories about Sally Hamilton and, you know, Anna Swartz, I'm telling them from this one perspective that I've kind of always existed in. So, you know, to sit here today and talk these things over, you know, yeah, I'm in the hot seat right now. Absolutely. I'm thinking about these things, and, you know, it's refreshing. And I hope some of the folks who are watching this are kind of second guessing, you know, the narratives that they've always encountered and the way they've encountered them. And so many of us who are passionate about local history, you know, think about broadly what the implications of being interested in local history are, and being interested in place and the voices of that place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Question the narrative that you're being told.
What are like other productive ways that people can look out for the marks of this erasure and correct their misconceptions and things like that, other than paying attention to language and things like that?
I think one of the things that people can do is when it is safe to, and you're going to your local museums, libraries, historical societies, things like that. I think it's looking to see, is there an inclusive history being told? Whether that is an indigenous history, whether that is a history of an enslaved person or a person of color, or women. I think that is, it's okay to question those narratives that are being told. And if you don't see them being told, ask those people, ask your docents, ask your librarians, and things like that. And if you don't have, if you're going there, let's say you're going to your local library to check out a book on Indigenous or Stockbridge-Munsee history, if they don't have any books there, ask them why. Can we get some in? Ask for that history. And then absolutely 100%, you can reach out to us and we can point you in the direction of places. But I think it's really important to make sure that you're holding your educational and cultural institutions accountable for the history that they are telling.
Absolutely.
That's spot on.
Exactly.
I'm just gonna hide, because this
Don't hide.
The burden is, it's important. It's important, and it's not a conversation that happens a lot at the local level. It's when we're dealing with people on a day-to-day basis, a lot of the dialogue gets distilled down to, well, how old is that building over there? Simple things like that. We're not talking about broad themes, and we're not talking about, well, sure, the building's that old, but it was built by an enslaved person, and
right.
The people who were running that household were women for 300 years and things like that. It's, we don't think about those. We just say, oh, that's an old building.
Exactly. Or like how it came, you're right, how it came to be. A few years ago, actually, I think it was longer than a few years ago, I was just finishing up grad school, and I went on a trip out west. My husband and I just were like, we need to get away. So we went out to the Black Hills in South Dakota, and one of the places that we stopped at was in Deadwood. And I was like, because I had watched the series, I was like, ooh, Deadwood. And then afterwards, as we were leaving, Deadwood does a really good job of keeping up that historical kind of feel to it. So like every night you get to see like the murder of what's his name? He's buried there. He was friends with Calamity Jane. It'll come to me. But you see do you know who I'm thinking? What is his name? It's totally blanking on me.
The gunfighter, the gambler.
Yes. Yeah. Buffalo Bill?
No, doesn't matter.
Wild Bill. That's who it was. Wild Bill Cody. Yeah. And anywho, you get to see his reenactment and the trial and all of that fun stuff. So they do a really good job at telling that Old West story of Deadwood. What they don't talk to you about is that Deadwood was an illegal settlement on the Great Sioux Reservation, all because gold was found in the Black Hills. So it's all about the narrative, questioning that narrative. So you saying, oh, that house is, X amount years old, but we forget to say, oh, it may have been built by an enslaved person, or it was, we forget that other part of that history. And that's the history we need to push forward and be more, yes, Deadwood is really cool and it's really exciting. And I'm ashamed to say I loved it, but it was an illegal settlement on a reservation that wasn't part of the United States. So it's important to tell the whole story.
Absolutely. It seems like a great place to start sharpening that critical eye as entertainment. Obviously, widen that critical eye too, beyond just movies and TV, but a great place to start is those stories that we absorb probably.
Yeah, it's just, I'm just thinking, and I don't want to run this on too long here because I'm sure Annika is recording, looking at the timer, but it's so interesting that we end with talking about a TV show here too. Because A Winter's Tale, we're thinking about this in the context of, the stories that are told by the fireside at the hearth and things like that. And, what is our hearth now? Where are we digesting our narratives? So
I
much of that
know,
is on
everyone,
screen.
yeah, and I think it's all been fair to say we've all been watching a lot of shows this year based on the fact that we can't leave our houses. So this is just one more thing to tune into.
Yeah.
And yeah, and maybe when you're watching those shows, you can question the narrative.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Heather, can we just go over again about how you can be reached and where we can find more about the Stockbridge-Munsee community and the resources and all that?
Yeah, so you can go to MohHeCon.com, click on departments, click on cultural affairs, and within cultural affairs, you're going to see our library and museum, our historic preservation, and our language revitalization programs. I oversee all three of those, and they are all run by very, very amazing people, so it's really exciting. You're going to find information on history about there. You're going to find links where you can donate individually to each program. You're going to find a couple of videos on there, and my email address is also on there as well, so you can reach me directly. You can also follow us on Facebook at the Arvid E. Miller Library, Museum, and Cultural Affairs Department page, where we host a plethora of online programming. We've got a couple programs coming up. We'll, talking about traditional medicines and different parts of our homelands out east, where we post, information, history. We have a series running right now called Magnificent Mohicans, where every week we post a couple stories about amazing, magnificent Mohicans, past and present, little story about them. And hopefully once, the vaccine is more distributed and we can open to the public, our museum will be open again, but right now it's not. So if you are doing research or anything, we can help you with that. Because again, our archives are not open digitally to the public, but we can find what you're looking for. So those are just a few ways that you can reach out to us.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much for the work you're doing.
Yes.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you for the work that you're doing.
We're chipping away at it, a little bit.
Yeah.
So, but this is phenomenal. This is such a treat getting to talk with you today. So.
Oh, my pleasure. And if you need any help changing the narrative in the Historical Society, just call me.
This is perfect. Thank you.
Yeah,
Perfect. Thank you guys so much
for sharing your time.
Thank you.
Bye.